How do we stand up for ourselves? That is the question I'm going to be answering today. Whenever we feel fear around someone in our life, it is usually because one conversation needs to happen. And maybe we have tried, but it still doesn't feel complete. This is a very common experience. If you have someone in your life who you care about and they've lashed out at you, bulldozed you, given you the silent treatment, or they just continually do things that make you feel uncomfortable, how do you bring that up to them in a way that's going to be effective? Today, I'm going to explain exactly how to do this. I'm Bryce Bauer, and this is the Relationships Made Simple for Men podcast. I'm a one-man show, at least for this podcast. I've been working with men for the last 15 years, and I also do couples work with my wife, Jenny. The reason why I chose this topic today is because this is often the most relevant action step when men come in to see me. They're meeting with me to get clear on how they can better show up in their lives. So a lot of what we're doing is the self-exploration. What are you feeling? What stories are you making up about that feeling? How are you coping with this feeling? And what are the historical roots of this feeling? In a nutshell, once we understand this about ourselves, then it makes it easier to work on our relationship with others because we're much more informed. If we don't really understand ourselves, people tend to use two strategies. The first is that they get aggressive. They blow up, lash out, blame, project. They think that the problem is all about the other person, which it rarely is, 100%. And that usually doesn't work for other people. I'm not saying that you can't be messy sometimes, but if you want softness and understanding, lashing out usually won't get you that type of reaction. The other route people go is that they turn passive. They sweep things under the rug, try to ignore the impact it has on them, and just put their head down and move on. That's a very common male strategy because a lot of guys aren't really aware how they feel anyways, so it makes it easy to ignore the subtle cues. People can also flip-flop. They can go from bottling things up to exploding. They can go from being really aggressive to completely shutting that down. What's the point in arguing? But either way, being on the extreme side of either one of these passive or aggressive reactions doesn't work. We want to be able to handle conflict from a grounded place. And we often underestimate just how scary this can be to our nervous system. For some people, it can be really scary to be honest. Maybe they've never done that in their lives. And for others, it can be really scary to slow down and get vulnerable. They're actually more comfortable in a fight because they don't really have to feel amidst the drama and the fighting. So you can do your own self-assessment to figure out where you're at. You might have different strategies with different relationships. And this is often the first thing we need to do is to get into the right state of mind and clarify the goal. I want to learn to grow up, to outgrow my losing strategies. I want a closer relationship with myself and the people in my life. That requires us being honest. And it also requires us being skillful. If this is what you really want in your life, consider that your anchor. Anytime you come to a crossroads, take a moment to reflect. How do I want to handle this? What's going to be best for me here? You need to be able to stand up for yourself. This is one of the most important skills in life. This applies to your career, your marriage, parenting, your friendships, your relationships to your extended family, and especially the relationship to yourself. When we don't feel like we have the power to stand up for ourselves, we feel weak, we feel powerless, we feel frustrated. This is what's at the core of many men's struggles. And there can be a lot of shame involved in this, realizing that you didn't stand up for yourself. So I get how tricky this can be, and I have been here myself. I'll tell you a quick story from my life so that you know that I'm not just someone telling others what they can do without having done it myself. And then I'll get into the very simple process for standing up for yourself. So I had a really good friend of mine that I had grown up with off and on, and we reconnected in adulthood and became really good friends. And it was one of those relationships that was 90% awesome and 10% what the fuck, maybe even 5%. The 95% looked like us doing backpacking trips and traveling overseas, fishing, talking about our lives. I loved his sense of humor. I thought he was hilarious. And the 5% was his relational struggles coming forward and rarely there being any repair. One example was the way he liked to drive. He had a huge truck, and for some reason, whenever he got behind the wheel and anyone on the road did something that he didn't like or slowed him down, he would get very aggressive, speeding, tailgating people, yelling at people. I just didn't get it. And I started to feel unsafe driving around with him and embarrassed. He'd also have these random flare-ups with other men where he'd mention almost getting in a fight with someone, conflict in his family, shouting matches with employees. He was a really, really nice guy, but he had a short fuse sometimes. And over the course of our relationship, this rarely came out against me because I tend to be less reactive. That's one of my strategies, meaning I can be subtly avoidant, or maybe not so subtly. I don't know what people would say. But anyways, we had this friend fracturing event where him and another friend of mine got to the point where they couldn't stand each other. And then a conflict around doing a trip together. And I'd finally had it. I realized that I did not feel safe trying to work out conflict with this friend. And I didn't agree with how he had treated our other friend. This was a pattern in his life that he didn't seem to want to look into. So, long story short, I brought up that I wanted to talk about this and work this out with him and repair. And there was a lot of different things that happened throughout the course of a 3-month span. But eventually it boiled down to me saying, hey, dude, I want to get some third-party help with this and or structure some time. Let's not just talk on the fly. I want to structure some time to work this out one-on-one. And he said no, that I only wanted to do it my way, which was true, although I think it was the best way that we were going to have a chance at resolving this. And I was willing to work with him on timing and all that. But he said no. And we've had a few interactions in the last few years, but our relationship is very limited now. There's almost nothing there. I still love him and care about him and want the best for him, but we haven't talked. And he's been more open to the things that I suggested in the last year. But for some reason, I just feel like that door is closed right now for me. And I was really stressed over the course of these 3 months of having conversations and sending some emails. And it didn't turn out to get me the result that I would have wanted ultimately, which was to have a closer relationship and a safer relationship with him. But I still feel good about the way I handled it for the most part. It wasn't perfect. And you could say that I lost a friendship because I was willing to stand up for myself. But you could also say that I confronted something very scary in my life and I was willing to let the chips fall as they may. And that makes me feel more confident in myself. And it allows me to not settle for subpar close relationships. And I still have work to do in other relationships, but that's just one story. Now, I realize if this is your spouse, the stakes are way higher and it's going to be different. But either way, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how to stand up for yourself with someone in your life. You probably want to write this down, or I will put it in the show notes. The first thing you want to do prior to step 1, step 0, is do a little pre-work by getting clear on what your boundary is. So let's use a really clean, simple example. Let's say your partner has been saying things or doing things that are flat out not okay and probably wouldn't be okay for anybody. Let's say they scream and then walk away. That's not how you want to be dealt with. It's probably not how they want to deal with relationships either. Let's say that that happens sometimes. The first thing you need to do is to get clear on what you will do if that happens again. And it cannot include you demanding that they do anything different because they may not. So a boundary that wouldn't work would be something like, the next time that you yell and walk away, I need you to come back and talk to me. That's a request, which may or may not work, but a boundary is what you do when someone does something that you don't feel okay with. So one boundary may be, if you yell and scream and walk away, I want us to set up a therapy or coaching session to work this out because we obviously can't do it on our own. Another boundary may be, if you do this, I may need to sleep in the other room until I feel safe again. Or if you scream and walk away, I may need to set up structured time for us to talk and use a skill-based exercise. Those are all very valid boundaries. So that's a thing that you need to get clear on before you have this conversation, because it might end up being that they ask you, well, what's going to be different? What does this mean now that you're bringing up this feeling? And you don't have to have an answer, but it's helpful to reflect on this some. Okay, so once you've completed the pre-work and you understand what boundaries might help you feel more safe in the process of standing up for yourself, the first thing you want to do is to get vulnerable and share what it's like for you to even bring this up in the first place. And I'd suggest using what I'm about to say verbatim. So it will sound like, hey, I want to bring up something that feels pretty scary for me, but I do feel ready to share it with you. Now, this will probably do two things. On one hand, it will lower their guard some because you're getting vulnerable, and really pay attention to your tone as you speak this. It's also going to put them on high alert. That whole, hey, I want to talk thing. And I don't know that there's a way to avoid that, but the vulnerability will help with that wall. It's probably going to want to go up because your partner or whoever you're talking to is working with the unknown, and they don't know how bad it is, and they don't know what's going to happen, what you're going to say. People often assume the worst, at least in their body. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is to ask for permission, and you could combine these two. Hey, I want to share something with you. It feels really scary, and I feel ready to share it. Are you open to that? You want to get their buy-in. And this is where you want to let this question land and really listen for the answer. So if they say no, don't share it. You'll have to go back to the drawing board. If they say, I don't know, maybe, that's still not a yes. So you'll want to flesh that out. They may need more context. Well, what's it about? Or why do you want to share it? And you can say, it's about me being more honest about my feelings. I do want to have a closer relationship with you where we can both share our feelings, use us language, we language, but don't go into sharing before you get the buy-in. I know this kind of sounds like a sales script, and it is to some degree. And then the third thing you want to do, and you'll want to do this beforehand probably, is come up with at least one objective example of what you're talking about. Don't say, sometimes you're like this, and then this is how I feel about it. Get very granular. Share the data and the feeling you had attached to the data. Two things that can't be argued with. When you yelled and walked away from me on Tuesday, I felt devastated, scared, angry, lonely, and then just let that land. Let them work with it. You've cleared the first big hurdle in standing up for yourself. And if they are open to having more of a conversation, then do that. If they get defensive or shut it down, you still did a good job. There are many different routes that this could go, and it may take getting some support to understand how to work with that, or do it in the presence of a professional. But just to recap, the pre-work is getting clear on your boundary. The first step is get vulnerable with your present moment experience, to ask permission. And then the third step is data and feeling. Following these steps will give you the best chance of success because it's clean and it's skillful, it's honest and heart directed. That's all I got for today. I'll see you next week.